Hello, this is Resource of the Week with SolanoConnex, Mental Health, Service Access, and You. My name is Valentina Kelly.
And I'm Elena Starr. And to kick off October, we have a very special episode and a very special guest speaker today for Filipino American History Month. So we are very, very excited to have and welcome back Nicollette Morales, Professor of Ethnic Studies and Coordinator of Kasaysayan Philipinx Learning Community at Napa Valley College. Welcome, Nicollette, again. Thank you so much for being with us for this special episode.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us what Filipino American History Month is?
Yeah, so Filipino American History Month, we decided in October, but because, the first Filipino that landed on the continental United States was documented October 18, 1587, right? And it was because of the Spanish galleon trades that were happening in Mexico and Acapulco, and Filipinos were used as slaves on these boats or in these galleon ships, and some of them jumped ship and really was fresh off the boat and went to the nearest land. And the first recorded Filipino landed in Morro Bay, which is in Central California. And if you go to Morro Bay, there is a plaque on a rock there that states the first Filipino that landed here in 1587. And so it's amazing that a lot of people don't think Filipinos have had a long history here in the United States, but we've been here for a very, very long time prior to the Declaration of Independence being written and signed. So this is just a part of Filipino American history or U.S. history that a lot of folks don't know about.
Wow. That's a really interesting perspective how you put it, like before the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that really puts into perspective. That's amazing.
Yeah. And we've been here in the United States for a long time, even though like the first person who came here, that wasn't really a big settlement, but we've had Filipinos in Louisiana that had our first big settlements in 1763, where they were the ones that helped to build the shrimp industry in Louisiana. You'll see their houses that were on stilts, similar to their houses in the Philippines, and really built the shrimp industry. And so, you have folks that are the shrimp dancing that came from Filipinos, and how they gathered shrimp in the bayous of Louisiana.
Wow.
Could you tell us a little bit about the Filipino community in Solano County specifically and the importance of celebrating Filipino American History Month in Solano County?
Yeah, so Mel Orpia, he documented Filipinos in Vallejo in his book. So it's a great book that goes back to 1912, but the first Filipino family that came to Vallejo, and their family name was Maria Martinez Carter. And so the cool story about her is that she married, a Buffalo Soldier. And so if you don't know what a Buffalo Soldier is, it's a African American soldier that fought in the Filipino American War in 1898 through 1901, right? And she married that Buffalo Soldier that, went away from the US forces and was like, you're calling Filipinos the N-word, similar to us here in the United States. And so why are we fighting against Filipinos that are being disgraced and discriminated the same as we are?
Yeah.
And so he brought her here to the United States. They lived in, New Orleans for a little bit and started a pig farm. But then, the crocodiles ate their pigs. They
Oh
left.
no.
They left to go to Vallejo and, in the shipyards at Mare Island, and really started their family out here. So they were one of the first Filipino American families here in Vallejo in 1912. And I think that just builds on the legacy of why folks come to Vallejo. A lot of people know that Filipinos, during that time in the 1900s, they had different jobs, right? Whether they were in farming, whether they were in domestic work, or they were nurses, or they went into the shipyard or the Navy military bases, right? Or they joined the Navy. And that was one of the things that Filipinos did, was joining military forces. And so I think the start of folks in Vallejo, or Filipinos in Vallejo, really began with this specific family.
Wow.
And grew, especially with the naval base at Mare Island.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I mean, so is Vallejo like in Solano County where the largest Filipino community is, or?
I mean, in the Bay Area,
Sounds
they
like
always
it.
say it's like Daly City.
Okay.
where that's the largest, but we do have a large Filipino community here in Solano County, in Vallejo specifically. But Filipinos are everywhere, right? And so
Yeah.
we are the third largest immigrant group here in
Yeah.
California, or if not the second largest, right? And
Yeah.
I think, it just shows that a lot of the history that we have on Filipinos, people think we started coming here after 1965, but we've been here for a long time. I mean, just that family alone since 1912 here in Vallejo, right? But you can count various generations all over this United States that have been here before 1965.
Yeah.
So I think that goes to show that, we need to learn more about, Filipino American history and how deep and long we've been here in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, that's so interesting. And you might not be able to answer this question. It's just, as I was listening to you talk about it, why do you think people think that the Filipino community has only been here so recently? I don't know if you can answer that.
I think it's like that influx of, like, in 1965, there was that Reunification Act that came about for immigration laws. But then it was also the fact that more nurses were coming in, and more of like the higher end workers were coming into the United States, because during the time of the 1900s, you had farm workers, right? And so you see that class difference. And so people don't assume that Filipinos were in the front lines of the United Farm Worker Movement, right? They were right there with Cesar Chavez, and their names are never talked about, right? Like Larry Itliong, Philip Veracruz, these men, or these manongs in the Filipino community that really led that movement, right? Before Cesar Chavez, decided to join with them. And I think that story is never heard about because of, like, that class difference, right? And I think that's the basis of it, obviously, but it also has to do with, like, our stories not being told until afterwards, right?
Yeah. No, thank you for that.
And then I don't know, Nicollette, if there's anything else that you wanted to expand on or touch on more.
Yeah. So the Filipino American National Historical Society was founded by Dorothy Ligo and also Fred Cordova. Fred Cordova, he wrote the first Filipino American history book, Filipinos, the Forgotten Asians, right? And so he really talked about our impact in the United States, from shrimp farming to the farm fields, right? In various places like Alaska, Hawaii, California, Seattle, and Washington. We've had an impact in this country for a long time. And without, FONS, or Filipino American National Historical Society, we would not be able to know about this history, right? And so they have been really taken up, having all of these Filipino American history books that are being printed. You have other folks that are from different places to have these affiliates all over the country, have certain FONS because they want to tell their story. So we do have a FONS Vallejo, right? A chapter out here led by Mel Orpia, and they really have helped to build that history here in Vallejo specifically, right? But we know that there's so much Filipino history in Solano County. Like I said, when you had a lot of Filipino folks coming to Mare Island because of the shipyard, right? Or because of the naval base, same goes for Travis Air Force Base, right? You have a lot of Filipinos like that are housed here because of the Air Force Base. And so military is a big thing in the Filipino community. So even though Navy is one of the main ones that Filipinos do go to, you do have folks going into the different military branches as well.
Wow. So if somebody wanted to learn more about, like, the history and the impact of the Filipino community in our country and our history, how could people do that? How could they learn more?
I would say take a class, right? You do have various places that offer a Filipino American history class. Like you said, I teach that Filipino American history class at Napa Valley College. And it's definitely, something that I go more in depth about, right? About what this history means and how we have impacted US history, and why Filipino American history is US history, right? And I think that's what folks tend to forget, like, because we've had our hands in different pots of, like, what US history has built, people tend to forget that there were other folks involved in that, right? And so I think taking a class, going to visit FONS, going to Pista Sanayon here in Vallejo, or the different Filipino events in the Bay Area. Pistahan is a big one in San Francisco. And then there's also other different communities, like having a learning community, right? Like, unfortunately, I'm only one of 6 learning communities in the state of California. And, all of our colleagues who have learning communities in their community colleges, we're really trying to build that momentum to have, similar to Umoja and Puente, those learning communities for African Americans and Latinx students. Like, we really want to make sure that it's covered throughout the entire state of California.
Yeah.
Because it's impactful, right? And it's something that I know growing up as a Filipino American in like a small town in Santa Rosa, like I did not have that. And so even though like there was a Filipino community center out in Santa Rosa,
Yeah.
but I didn't know the history of Filipinos in Santa Rosa until I got to college, and how impactful that was, and how that would have been more eye-opening to know my culture at such a young age. And so I think it's really great that, students in high school are able to do dual enrollment and take college classes for free, right? And they can start learning about their history. And also ethnic studies at the high schools. Hopefully it's more building out here in Solano County. But I taught ethnic studies, right, in San Francisco, and it was more well known out there instead of out here, right? And people are slow to it, but it's cool. Like they're getting there. But ethnic studies does not just focus on, obviously one ethnic group. It focuses
Right.
on all of the people of color's stories and histories here in the United States. But, if they want to learn more, definitely go to a class, reach out to different Filipino community members. The Filipino Community Center in Vallejo off of Amador is a great place. The Philipinx Mental Health Initiative,
Yeah.
be great to go to. And then also the Philipinx Youth Coalition that is under the FMHI. So it would be great if anyone wants to get a hold of them, like they can email us and whatnot.
Well, that's how, we learned about you, and even the fact that, I never knew October was Filipino American History Month. And so that's how we learned about you, is from a community event and listening to you speak. And I just remember you kind of giving us some fun facts about it. And so that's great that people can also go and attend those and learn more too.
And we do have events coming up for Filipino American History Month this year. And so specifically, open to the community, October 18th, obviously to commemorate the first Filipino American to step foot here in California. It's going to be at Napa Valley College. And that is going to be from, I think, 12 to 1, or if not 11 to 1. I'll make sure to let you know about that. But October 19th, it's going to be at the American Canyon Library, where we are going to showcase different artists and authors. And then FMHI is also going to present their awards to our students who are applying for a grant from FMHI, and that's from 6 to 8 p.m.
Oh my God. What date was that last one?
October 19th. So that's a
Okay.
Wednesday. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's so exciting.
I would definitely look at FMHI's or Kasaysayan's Instagram page. Definitely there is Undiscovered, which is in San Francisco, UNDSCVRD. And it's a Filipino American market that they have there, and usually have some type of Filipino American History Month event that's happening. Really, Filipino American History Month is very busy for lots of Filipino Americans. There's various events that you could totally, look up at different places, but those two places or those three places are where to look for.
Awesome.
I think for me, it's like, Filipino Americans, like, it seems like we tend to be with ourselves, but our history is so rooted in other people's ethnicities too, right? Other people of color's history. When we talked about the Buffalo Soldiers and how, people don't know that, we fought alongside Black soldiers, prior to everything that's been happening recently, right? And so it's like our history is embedded into Black history with, fighting alongside, and also, being a part of those miscegenation laws where we couldn't marry outside of our ethnic background, right? And so we understand the struggles that other cultures have had to face as well, because we've faced that. And then also with the Mexican Americans and their fight to have better labor laws, like we were at the forefront as that as well. And so making sure to remember that our history is also entwined with other people of color's history, and that we have fought alongside of them as well as they have fought alongside of us too. And so I think that's critical to know, since sometimes we're so siloed in our different ethnic groups, but we do have a rich history with one another, and this rich history of resistance and fighting for what is right, and so I think that's something important to reiterate to Filipino Americans, and especially the younger generation that don't know that rich history of us in solidarity with other folks.
Yeah. You said something really powerful. Filipino American history is U.S. history. I was kind of just thinking back into, when I took history classes, and I feel like so much of this was skipped over, which, is like such a big failure. Just for anybody, I think, trying to understand the history of our country. And so, yeah, I thought it was really powerful you said that.
Yeah, and it's like, you don't see yourself in history, then how do you feel part of this country, right? And I think that's what ethnic studies is so important, because then you see like people of color's history in the history books, right? Because sometimes we get maybe a paragraph or even a page or just one side of the page, right, of our own history, and we don't see ourselves. And so the impact of ethnic studies is to make sure that you see yourself in history and that you are important as a person of color, and that your story has been embedded into US history prior to people knowing about it, right? Or being written about.
Prior to the, I mean, when you had mentioned just time frame, like prior to the Declaration of Independence, I was just like, wow, that, I mean, just thinking of that timetable, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
you know, because that's such a big part in US history, right? And so
Right.
it's just like, you're like, no, we were here and part of history before this like monumental thing. I mean, I think that's just, yeah, I mean, it just speaks volumes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it, like obviously when folks jumped off ship, they were just venturing off into whatever was there. And so obviously before California was California and it's still a part of Mexico, and the indigenous folks there, we had people that they mated with other indigenous folks. And so you do have Filipino background in various countries that we would have never known about until we found out that history. Yeah, so there's always this confusion of the P or the F in Filipino. And I think, when you say the Philippines, it is with a P, right? And it started with King Philip. But prior to that, obviously, Filipinos were not Filipinos, and we had our own different tribes and barangays and communities prior to colonization. But then when people wanted to, take back what Filipino meant to them, when you write the word Filipino, people tend to either do an F or P. Why some people do a P is because pili means to choose and Pino means people. And so that really has a lot to do with the resistance, and also resistance for Filipinos back when Marcos was in era. During martial law, during the Marcos era in the Philippines, right? And so people really wanted to make it their own. And then also out here in the United States, Filipinos chose P and chose Filipino because it was that sign of resistance or decolonization, because F was never a part of our language, our indigenous language in the Philippines. There was only certain sounds and certain words that were written in our indigenous language before, alibata or babayin, and there was no harder sounds until the Spanish came to bring them. And so why I choose Filipino in the Kasaysayan learning community is because of that history that we have of choosing ourselves and rebranding ourselves into the name that we choose, and really remembering our history of pre-colonial times before Spanish came to colonize the Philippines.
Wow, I had no idea. Thank you.
And then the X, why we do X, A, or O. So the X really inclusive. We understand that there's not just one gender or two genders, and so we want to make sure it's inclusive to all of our people who identify as non-binary or different genders.
Wow, awesome. That's amazing.
But it's really just like it's a choice, and so people can, because identity is so fluid.
Yeah,
it really is a choice that one has to make for themselves. So.
Well, Nicollette, just want to really thank you so much for joining us today and giving us a chance to learn a little bit more about Filipino American History Month. We want to remind you all that if you're looking for mental or emotional health resources and services, you can visit SolanoConnex, which is spelled CONNEX.org. Thank you.
Thank you.